Lecture 3 for Module 4, Genre, the importance of comedy. So let's spend a little time looking at this other mask, comedy. Probably most of us, if I asked, would you like to see a comedy or a tragedy, you would probably say comedy. And if I asked you why, what might you say? Well, you might say, because it's just entertainment. All I just want to do is laugh. Because it's not about anything serious. I don't want to worry about serious things right now. I just want to take my mind off serious things. And I want something funny. Well, let me shatter those illusions for you on this side, right? Yeah, comedies are funny, but good comedies are so much more than, quote, just entertainment. So let's think back to that Bogart scene that I'm asking you to watch and think about how that is giving us more than just entertainment. Because at bottom, comedy is a coping mechanism. Anthropologists think that human beings learned how to smile in order to deflect violence. Okay? So, we kind of have all seen the kid that's about to get beat up and they're able to kind of tell a joke and kind of wriggle out of things, right? Comedy is a coping mechanism. So, what does comedy as a genre of theater help us cope with? Well, comedy can help us cut big problems in society down to size. Comedy can help us regain our perspective. Definitely, comedy reminds us not to take ourselves or the world around us or powerful people too seriously. And sometimes comedy is what we turn to so we can laugh, so we don't cry, right? Comedy is a stress reliever. Laughter is a fantastic tension reliever, right? We laugh when we're nervous. We laugh to show that we're on the same page with other people. We're laugh to show that we're relaxed. And, doing that does actually relax us. Because in some ways, laughter has similar effects on our bodies as catharsis, right? We've got the big air exchange from our deep laughter. We are releasing tension from our muscles, right? Sometimes our whole body shakes, right? Sometimes we laugh until our sides hurt because our muscles are contracting and releasing as we laugh. Also, we release our stress hormones in that exhaled air. And sometimes if we laugh till we cry, we release those cortisol and other stress hormones in our tears. There's even a legitimate practice of laughter therapy. Yes, you could go see a therapist and pay them $60 an hour to laugh. I kid you not, but some people swear by it. But here's a key difference between these two genres. Where tragedy really engages our heart and pulls our heartstrings through building up all of that empathy, comedy really asks us to use more of that aesthetic distance, that emotional kind of distance and staying less engaged emotionally and more of an intellectual exercise. Because think about it. The low level of empathy is what allows us to laugh at the characters and their situations. And when we're doing that, we can also laugh at our own deepest fears. And this process allows us to look at situations and ideas and events that are going on in our own lives or in society at large, helps us look at them more objectively without the emotional baggage that may have accompanied it before, right? So sometimes when we're stressed, we need a comedy because going on that emotional, empathetic journey with the tragic protagonist is just like, oh my God, I'm already there. And sometimes what we need is, I need to really separate myself from what's going on, take a step back, look at things more objectively, and I can't be objective when my emotions are engaged. And so what comedy does, it allows us to look at things from a new angle, right? A fresh perspective, and to look critically at the way things are at status quo. Because when you're laughing at something, you're not afraid of it. And when you're not afraid, you can see it more clearly. When you poke fun at something, you're automatically looking at the flaws, at the weak points, at the holes in the argument. And when you can look at something more objectively and see strengths and weaknesses into it, then you can discuss the issue or the person or the situation more freely and completely. And most importantly, you can start to see ways to improve or change things that you don't like. So this is where that ridiculous spell in the Harry Potter film clip comes into play, but lots of other things too. Um, if you are fans of Saturday Night Live, you are probably too young to have been fans of Saturday Night Live back in 2008, but um, Sarah Palin was a vice presidential nominee for the Republican Party, and she delivered a tour de force powerhouse speech at the Republican convention. And people who did not want Republicans to have the White House in 2008 were like, oh my God, she's so amazing. She's so, charismatic and energetic and just gave a hell of a speech. We are doomed. And then Saturday Night Live kind of poked fun at an interview where she really flubbed. She wasn't well prepared and came across as looking, not really with it on issues and not really concerned about being not with it. And so Tina Fey played Sarah Palin on Saturday Night Live and did this real big send up where they asked her, they were pretending to be like Katie Couric asking her a question on foreign policy. And she said, because she lives in Alaska, she said, I can see Russia from my house, which is not something the actual Sarah Palin ever said, but it's probably what most people remember about her from that era. Because when they did this comedy routine of her, all of a sudden, critics of Sarah Palin were like, wait a minute, she's not this amazing tour de force powerhouse bully. She's a human being and she's got weaknesses, and we can probe those weaknesses and, hopefully outmatch her in a debate and then hopefully outvote her in an election. In class, ask me to tell you the story of the Emperor's New Clothes if you haven't already heard it. And let's talk about how that kind of is an example of the power of comedy. Okay, so while comedy can be this kind of empowering moment because you're detaching yourself from emotions, you're able to see things more clearly, you're kind of able to cut bullies down to size, it still is entertaining. And let's take a look at a couple of ways that it is. Lots of different kinds of comedies, right? You can use physical humor, where there's a lot of slapping and, pratfalling and prop gags and things like that, right? Silly voices and antics and lots of fast pace. You might have a lot of verbal humor, puns, where you're using words with two meanings, malaprops, which is when you use a big fancy word, but you mean it not quite the right way. Verbal repartee, which is, really kind of fast paced banter where two characters are matching wits against each other. Comedy also has ridiculous situations and quirky characters, and definitely uses a lot of exaggeration and kind of offbeat details. Where tragedy is everything is kind of serious and everything is important. Comedy is like, we don't take ourselves as seriously, and neither should you. But that doesn't mean that comedy is just entertainment. Because we have these things called comedy of ideas, right? Where we can take a serious subject like war or death or injustice and present it with humor. And when we're doing that, we're breaking down taboos and other psychological barriers in the audience to get them to think about the serious issue with less baggage and more clarity. So a classic example I always use is a TV show from the 1970s called MASH, right? MASH stands for Mobile Army Surgical Hospital. It was dealing with the horrors of war. It was set in the Korean War, but was really probably a critique on the Vietnam action. And yeah, it was funny. There are these characters that were, doing silly things and engaging in a lot of witty banter and playing pranks on each other. But it was also kind of bringing into American living rooms every week the cost of war on soldiers and on the medical staff and support staff that tries to stitch them back up, and really trying to get Americans to think about what are we doing over there and should we be doing it. If you think about a more recent sitcom called Mom, that's about a grown woman and her mother, both of whom are dealing with addiction and recovery. And yeah, it's a funny, plot lines because they get into, silly situations, but it's also a very compassionate look on a problem that so many Americans face. Or maybe you saw this spring, The Good Place. I binged watched it on Netflix and Amazon Prime this spring, right? And that's all about like the afterlife, whether or not you're going to heaven or hell or somewhere in between, and how, sort of very quickly went from this kind of fish out of water, silly story about Ellen Sheltraub, who doesn't belong in the good place, and became this real kind of deep investigation of, what does it mean to be a good person? what does it mean to have an afterlife? What should we be doing on earth? And what does it mean to have lived a good life um, without sacrificing any funniness at all? So, what's so cool about comedy is that it has the power to empower us to create a better world or a situation for ourselves. And so in some ways, comedy is kind of like sneaking the vegetables into the dessert, you know? It's letting us think about big issues and serious issues and big ideas while still entertaining us.